Steve, how you doing? Dave?
George, you were back. How are you?
Thank you.
Nice to meet
Good to see you again. Steve. So you guys have this unfamiliar.
Yes.
Came just in time, boss.
Great.
Good afternoon to all. For the record, today is July 16th, 2008, and for the benefit of our listeners and home viewers, we are now conducting Glendale Building and Fire Board of Appeals meeting. This meeting was posted on Wednesday, July 9th, 2008, at the City Hall, City of Glendale. And now, can we have a roll call, please?
Board Member Eric Kishishian.
Present.
Board Member Harmik Abkarian.
Present.
Co-Chairman, Bachman Ehsan.
Here.
And Chairman George Bogosian.
Here. Next item on the agenda.
Presentations and commendations. Today we have none.
And the next one.
Oral communications. Today we have none.
I see none, and we don't have any cards here. So let's go to next item of the agenda.
Approval of minutes of previous meeting.
Chairman Bogosian, members of the board, at item 4A on your agenda, you have the minutes from our March 19, 2008 meeting. Copies of those minutes were distributed to you in advance, and they were made available to the public. If you have any comments or revisions, we'd be happy to discuss them at this time, or if you found them in order, a motion to adopt would be in order.
Are there any comments from our board members? Seeing none, I'd like to have a motion for approval.
I second. Before a second, we need a motion to adopt.
Oh, motion, I'm sorry, I thought you, okay, motion to adopt.
Second.
Second, yes.
Very good.
Can we have the roll call, please?
And
Board
let's have a roll call, please.
Board Member Eric Kishishian.
Yes.
Board Member Harmik Abkarian.
Yes.
Co-Chairman Bachman Ehsan.
Yes.
Chairman George Bogosian.
Yes. And let's go to next item, our agenda, old business.
Today we have none.
Now, next one, new business. I
Today.
see none.
Chairman Bogosian, members of the board, let me just comment on item 6, new business. We were contemplating placing one of the reports, which is the primary purpose of today's meeting, under new business, but because this board is a discretionary board, not an administrative board, and therefore does not actually have the authority to direct staff, we chose to put it under item 7B. I just wanted to bring that to your attention when we get to item 7B and we present some information regarding some fee adjustments, despite the fact it is under section 7, which is reserved for reports for information only. If you do have any comments or if you would like us to respond to something, we will be happy to follow your direction on that. I just wanted to clarify that because it does not fall under section 6 under business.
Do you have any comments?
No.
No comments? No comments. Can we go to item number 7?
Very good. Chairman Bogosian, members of the board, we have 3 reports for you today. At 7A, we have our monthly building and safety report, and I'll go ahead and walk you through that to dispense with it. Shouldn't take any more than about 5 minutes. Under the bottom tab of your packet, you will have your very familiar monthly report from Building and Safety, which generally indicates volumes of activity and total revenue for the reporting period. You will notice that this report is dated June 2008 and therefore basically closes out the fiscal year. What I would like to do is draw your attention to the first page of that report, which is our income summary, and there is quite a bit of information here that might be of interest to you. First off, in the first row, under building activity, you will notice that in terms of our year-to-date activity, and since this is the June 2008 report, this will give you a snapshot of how busy we were this past year. You will see that year-to-date we had, for building activity, 2,386 projects as compared to 2,520 during the previous year. While this represents a decrease of approximately 130 units, to be precise 134 units over the course of the year, it's actually only a decrease of about 5%. So even though things did slow down a bit, we still handled, in terms of work unit volumes, 95% of what we did the year before, which was indeed a very busy year. If you take a look at the row right underneath that, for building combination, you'll see a different story. Building combination is a category which represents the activity of our combination permits, which are generally restricted to single-family dwelling projects only. These combination permits are permits that one document will entitle a property owner to construct not only the dwelling itself, but then do all the trade work, the mechanical work, electrical work, plumbing, and so forth. And it was created to simplify the process, make it a little bit more affordable for them, and allow our combination inspectors to perform all of the inspections on that project at the same time, thereby increasing our responsiveness to those customers. Year to date for this past fiscal year, we saw 476 combination type projects. That was compared to 668 the year before. That represents a decrease of 192 projects, which is pretty consistent with what the whole Southern California area has seen due to our economic downturn. Most of the decreases in work are indeed within the residential area. Cities that have a tremendous amount of commercial development and manufacturing, those types of projects generally keep going. But in terms of a property owner's desire to improve or rebuild their own residential property has been affected tremendously by our current economic situation, and that's borne out in these numbers. That decrease of 192 combination projects represents a 29% decrease. And so that has definitely affected how I have shifted my staff around to handle some of the other projects. While things did slow down in the residential sector, we were very busy this past year due to a number of projects, one in particular, the Americana Ep-Round. And this coming year, we've already foreseen that there will be quite a bit still of large construction due to some high-rise projects that are on the books, so we anticipate being busy there. In terms of plan check, which is really the indicator which shows how busy we are, regardless of whether or not you're looking at just commercial and industrial projects or residential projects, we were actually pretty static. Our year-to-date totals for plan check projects over the course of the year was 1,783 projects. That's a lot of projects for us to plan check during the course of 1 year. If you were to compare that to our previous year-to-date, closing out the month of June 2007, we had 1,770, which was actually 13 plan checks fewer the year before than we had this year. So our plan check staff was actually slightly busier than we were before. However, those 13 additional projects do actually add up to less than a 1% change, so I consider that to be static and flat. If you take a look at the subtotal for the income for the top portion of that report, you'll notice that during this past fiscal year, Building and Safety brought in just over $4.6 million. To compare that to our previous year-to-date, which had the bulk of the revenue for the Americana project and the Embassy Suites high-rise ductile concrete frame hotel, the previous year we had almost $6.4 million. So while $4.6 million is a pretty hefty chunk of revenue for us, it does actually represent a decrease from the previous year of $1.77 million. However, I don't want the viewing audience at home or the board to think that that revenues have decreased substantially, because that $6.4 million was a very anomalous year, much higher than we have ever seen before. And to tell you the truth, the $4.6 million actually is higher than we saw in years previous to last year as well. And that $4.6 million does indeed indicate that we have been healthy. If you take a look at the very, very bottom of that front page, the numbers are pretty reflective of what I had just indicated. The previous year-to-date total revenues for building and safety alone did come in just slightly over $6.4 million the year before, and this past year our annual revenues were just shy of $4.7 million. So we were pretty healthy. If you take a look at page 2 of our monthly report, this will give you an idea of some of our work units, and will give you an idea of where the bulk of the development this past year really was. On page 2 of the monthly report, you'll see that in terms of single-family dwellings on line 1, and people are generally interested in housing starts, so we always track these separately. Single-family dwellings, this past year, we saw construction of 23 new homes in the city of Glendale. Those are single-family homes, not to be added in or confused with our multifamily residential occupancies. That was actually 2 homes more than we saw the previous year in 2007, when we had 21 during that year. We had a total valuation of those, construction valuation of those 23 homes of about $7.9 million, which had a total, an average construction valuation of $342,000, which is fairly typical for construction valuations. I don't want this to be confused with sales prices, because, of course, real estate values in Glendale are substantially higher than the norm in the greater LA basin, and I think you'd be pretty hard-pressed to find a new home for sale for that average construction valuation of $342,000, but that's roughly where we were. Line 3, however, tells a completely different story. While line 1 for housing starts had 2 more dwellings and we were relatively static, line 3, which represents multifamily dwelling projects, is an entirely different story. The previous year, we saw 16 projects. This past, or the current year that we just closed out, had 10 projects. So we had 60% more projects the year before. But if you take a look at the valuation, you'll see that the previous year we had a lot of construction in those multifamily residential structures, and that's where most of the valuation and fees came from. This past year, those 10 multifamily apartment projects had a construction valuation of about $26 million. In comparison, the previous year, which did include all of the residential construction for Americana, not just the for rent, but also their for purchase condominium development as well. The previous year, for comparison's sake, comparing it to the $26 million, had $53,762,000. So about twice what we saw before. If you take a look at all of the other figures for construction valuation, they're all about the same. So you can see that aside from the multifamily dwellings, in terms of construction valuation, where were the big changes between 2007 and the previous year, 2006? In that particular area for residential construction, it was primarily in the multifamily residential area. If you take a look at the rest of the numbers within residential, as I mentioned, it's fairly static. I do want to draw your attention to line 7, however. Line 7, I believe, is something of an indicator of what we can expect here in the city of Glendale in terms of how our economy is affecting private property owners. And the reason for that is line 7 represents re-roof projects only. Re-roofing projects generally fall into 2 categories. People will either re-roof their building when it's a little bit too late and winter comes and the leaks are manifesting themselves by wet carpet, wet floors, and stains in ceilings. And then there are also re-roofing projects because people who do take very good care of their properties do preventive work, and before it gets too late, they have their roofs replaced. That actually falls into a discretionary category because since it has not yet gotten to the point where a new roof is necessary, some individuals will try to strategize financially when the most optimum time to do that work is. Well, if you take a look at line number 7, there's a rather dramatic difference in the number of re-roofing projects we had this past year compared to the same period of time the year before. As opposed to 486 roofing projects in 2006, during 2007 we only had 411, which is 75 projects less. That represents a decrease in re-roofing projects a little bit greater than 15%. A 15% decrease in work which it's just being deferred at this point because most of these are probably discretionary projects that money's tight, people are choosing not to do it at this time. Those problems will not go away. Sooner or later those buildings will have to get re-roofed, and with each year the condition of the roof only gets worse. So when we see that there's a decrease of 15%, we know that the economy is affecting our constituent base. If you were to have taken a look at similar reports for other years, you would see that re-roofing is a very, very good indicator and tends to be flat. Okay. Likewise, if you take a look at the valuation, the total valuation of re-roofing projects just from one year to the other has about a $2 million difference. So basically what this tells us is that during 2007, roughly $2 million of some type of probably preventive maintenance work in roofs was deferred, and that's just going to come back later on. Item number 9 is the big story here in terms of valuation for the city of Glendale. This current year we saw a little over $7 million in mixed-use projects, which was all represented in one project, which is pretty typical. One mixed-use project will generally have a valuation of somewhere from $7 to $10 million on average. Same time last year we had one project, total valuation $101 million. This is the Americana project that we're referring to there, and the valuation of that scope of the work. If you take a look at the totals right below row number 23, you'll see exactly where we ended up the year, and it's right on target with respect to what we typically see. Our total annual construction valuation for 2007 came in at $192,228,957, which is just about where we typically are. I generally see numbers for our department anywhere in the range of about $185 million to about $200 million. And so if we were at $192 million, we were right on target with respect to where we expected to be. Of course, the previous year, with all of the activity with Americana, we had roughly $339 million, which was a 43% difference between those 2 years. Last thing before I turn it over to see if you have any questions regarding this report, I did want to point out in our dwelling unit summary portion of the last page, our net dwelling unit increase was 154 units added to the city of Glendale. Those took the form of those 23 single-family dwellings that I mentioned before, and then the balance of those units, which would be 131 units, were all in multifamily dwellings. And if you were to take a look at our customer count, pretty typical of what we see. The past month, which was June, we saw 1,806 customers come through our doors. It's pretty typical. We generally see about 1,700 to 1,800 customers in person every single month. That doesn't include our phone service to our customer base either. If you were to take a look at our yearly total, what that means is that during 2007, the Permit Services Center served 21,271 walk-in customers. We were clearly busy this past year. And with that, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to address them.
I have one question, Mr. Tom, on overall, the valuation that we have, 192 million to 28 versus 338 million 898. I know Americana had a great effect on these figures, and that happens once in a blue moon, project like that. But what was the year before, like 2005, to see that 192 million comparing to the year like 2005? Would you remember anything?
Chairman Bogosian and members of the board, my memory is not that good. However, I can tell you I believe that the year previous to 2006, our total construction valuation was less than this figure of 192. What that figure was, I don't entirely recall. During the 10 years that I have been here, I've seen annual construction valuations on the low end, I believe. One year during this past decade, we were as low as $113 million. And then on the high end, discounting the year with Americana, I believe we had one year with 228, I believe was the highest we ever saw during this past 10-year period. If you were to take a look at most of the years, they generally fell in the range of about 185, 190 million. So even with the slight turn in the economy, the construction valuation,
well.
it's been okay. Very different than a lot of other cities that saw an immediate decline. I don't know how strong we will continue to be here in Glendale, and that's why I do monitor certain things, such as Line 7, where we see how people are deferring certain expenses, which are going to come back and haunt them. But so far, if you were to take a look at the plans that are being filed right now, there's quite a bit of work that is still being filed, and our backlog is not as short as I would like it to be, because we do have a lot of plans on hand. Those plans, by the way, are not all small plans. We are getting large-scale projects, and even high-rise are being submitted for us.
In fact, that's what my next question was, those high-rises, due to the economy of today, what we see. Are those high-rises moving, or they have put a stop because of the loans and many things, what is happening today?
So far, the primary projects that we're seeing that are on the horizon, right in the general vicinity of Central and Wilson area, those projects are moving forward. In fact, they're getting their final entitlements through planning and through the agency to move forward to us, and we're strategizing on how we want to plan check those. We have not seen any indication that those projects will be shelved. The only large-scale project that has recently been shelved was not a high-rise project. It was a fairly large project, however. I believe that it was slated to be a mixed-use building somewhere on the order of 6 stories, so it would fall in the mid-rise category. That project, it turns out, they're coming back to see us, though, because under the new international building code-based code, it's now a little bit more affordable to build that particular size building, because the new code allows construction of up to 6 stories, and this particular project was exactly 6 stories. You can now build up to 6 stories with type 3A construction, which is similar to our older type 3 1 hour, which allows for light frames. So whereas before they costed it out with structural steel and concrete, and it was just cost prohibitive as the cost of steel kept rising, they're now able to go light frame. It'll probably be steel frame as opposed to wood frame due to shrinkage issues on a 6-story building, but steel frame is still much more affordable than either structural steel or ductile concrete.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Very good. At item 7B, we have a report from the building official, that would be me, and our fire marshal. However, Dave Woods is not able to join us, but we do have Vaskin Demirjian here to provide that report on behalf of fire prevention. If you take a look at the last tab in your packet, you will see a draft report which has been prepared and will eventually be submitted to the City Council. However, as our board here for the building department and the fire department, we often like to share these matters with the board before we do present them to the council, just to get your feedback and see how you feel, and also just to keep you informed and to allow the viewing audience to be informed with directions that we may be going that might affect them. Let me think if any of you, no, I don't think any of you were involved with our last fee adjustment. So let me just comment on that. Fees for services at the Permit Services Center were last adjusted and adopted by the City of Glendale back in 2002. Since it's 2008 right now, that represents 6 years without any change to those fees. Fortunately, or unfortunately, we've been able to make do without increases during those past 6 years, primarily due to staff vacancies. Because of staff vacancies, we have been able to save funds due to salary savings. So while the value of money over the past 6 years has certainly declined and you can't buy as much, and if you were just to take a look at some of the economic changes in terms of consumer indexing, the amount of money that we have been bringing in over the past few years since it has been static has been able to buy us less and less in terms of salaries, equipment, other contract services, and so forth. Therefore, it is now time for us to go back and revisit those fees. At first, oh, and by the way, I would be remiss if I did not mention that Mr. Michael Wiedeker, who's in the audience, did an absolutely outstanding job putting this packet together, taking a look at information that was previously compiled for the 2002 fee study, manipulating that data to address our current costs based on our salary levels, staffing levels, the level of service that we provide, and so forth. And he made some adjustments to this report. After all was said and done, I thought that Mr. Wiedeker was going to come up with a proposal to increase these fees that would be a little bit closer to what I estimated the actual increase in CPI would have been over the course of 6 full years. But I'm happy to report that Mr. Wiedeker has submitted to me a proposal, and after review I concurred with it, to increase the majority of our fees by only 3%. In fact, not all of the fees have been increased in the Permit Services Center by 3%. In particular, what I would like you to do is turn to page 3 of 13 of the report at the very end of your packet. If you take a look at the last tab, there will be a report. It's 13 pages long, and on page 3 of 13, you'll see Table 1. And Table 1 is our permit fee table based on valuation.
This shows page 5, looks like what we have. On page 3, there is no.
Let's see, you should have...
revised copy we have.
Oh, you know what? You have 2 reports. The report that you're looking at is actually the fire report. Take a look at your packet, not the report that was handed out at the beginning of this meeting. If you look towards the back of your packet, there's a tab. It should be the bottom tab. Flip all the way to the bottom tab.
Proposed development fee.
And there will be a resolution.
Did you say page 3, Mr. Tom?
Yes, page 3.
Additional copies here.
Here.
Yeah.
I see you turning to it. Very good.
I got it.
I'd like to walk you through this because I think that what has been done is we've taken a very responsible approach at adjusting the fees to address the need to recover cost while at the same time being sensitive to the restrictions under the government code which dictate that we should not recover fees in excess of our actual cost. What Mr. Wiedeker was able to discern by looking at the previous analysis and then also our current fee structure was that the 2 bottom categories in Table 1, projects with a total valuation between $100,000 $100,000 and $1 million. And then the final tier evaluation for projects over $1 million, those categories we determined there was actually no need to adjust the fee. And the reason for that is due to the tiered method by which fees are assessed. The fees for those projects do tend to be much larger than for a smaller project, and when you consider the level of effort and the efficiencies that are derived by staff working on larger projects, it was deemed unnecessary to add the 3% additional increase to those two categories of fees. But aside from those two, all of the other fees for building and safety will be increased by 3%, and the objective here is to see to it that the fees that are collected in the Permit Services Center are sufficient to cover the costs provided to those customers, so that we will not need a general fund subsidy to pay for the services that go to our developers and our builders. In that manner, developers, property owners, contractors, architects, and so forth that do work to develop land within the city of Glendale will bear their own costs through these adjusted fees. To that end, what I would like to do is I would just like to point out that for the most part, the fees were readily convertible to a whole dollar amount by adding 3%. However, in some instances, to avoid a fractional dollar fee, the fees might have been adjusted upwards a few cents just to get to the next whole dollar. But to demonstrate that, if you turn to page 1 of that fee resolution, I'll just give you a couple of examples. Don't want to take the time to go through all of them, but on page 1 you'll see that our administrative charges, if somebody comes to the Permit Services Center and wants to make a change on a permit that we have already issued, or if they lose their inspection card and they need a duplicate so that we can replicate the inspections that have already been performed, the fee for that used to be $32. By adding 3% to that, it would come to, it used to be $32. By adding 3%, it would come to $32.95. Rather than charging $32.95, we added 5 cents, and it's $33 now. Similarly, if you turn to page 2 of 13, here's another example. Our reinspection fee, people don't realize this, but when people aren't ready for inspections and they call our inspection staff to go out and perform an inspection, and it takes city resources to go out there, if they are not ready and we have to perform more inspections than would normally be required to perform that level of service, we will charge for extra trips. We used to charge $65 for that. If you add 3% to $65, it comes out to exactly $66.95. Once again, off by 5 cents. So we rounded that up to $67. But most of the other fees were already very convenient figures that worked out well. For example, in the middle of page 2, when we review a geologic report or geotechnical report, we used to charge $100. So by adding 3% of that, it goes to exactly $103, and that's exactly what the new fee is, $103. If it turns out to be a new report that is not associated with a plan check, so we don't already have some need to do research on that particular property, there is more time required by my staff. Therefore, the previous fee was $200. We now will charge $206. So as you can see, the fees were adjusted slightly to add 3% to that, and aside from a few rounding adjustments, the only other exceptions to those 3% incremental changes occur on page 7 of 13 first. I'd like to draw your attention to that. It turns out that there were 2 mechanical inspection services that we were providing that we were not adequately assessing a fee. In the case of heating and cooling equipment for HVAC equipment, line item 6 has been added. If you have an air conditioning system and it is not a single-speed system, but it uses a variable speed control unit, there is additional effort that is necessary for us, oftentimes involved in the testing and balancing of those types of systems. For that reason, we had to add a line item because it was brought to our attention we were previously performing those inspections free of charge. And so it is necessary to cover the inspector's time for that. It's not a tremendous expense, and we don't get a lot of these units, but it is appropriate that the people that do install this pay for that inspection service. Therefore, we have a fee. If you're going to install up to 4 units, the fee is $100 for inspection. And if you're going to exceed that, we will charge $10 for each unit above 4. So it would be $100 plus $4 for each additional unit. Likewise, if you turn to page 8, we also had another mechanical change, but these two are the only exceptions to the 3%, and that is under other mechanical equipment. Line item 3 deals with commercial kitchen exhaust hoods. Previously, we charged a flat inspection fee of $25 for the exhaust systems for kitchen exhausts. It was brought to our attention that the same fee was being charged for either a Type 2 or a Type 1 hood. Now, the difference, for those of you that may not know, is a Type 2 hood is an exhaust hood which is suitable for removing odors, heat, steam, and things of that nature, but not grease-laden vapors. Anytime there is an exhaust system which removes grease-laden vapors, that type of hood system must be constructed as a Type 1 hood, which requires additional fire-resistive shaft protection to see to it that if grease does get past the grease filter and it does accumulate within the shaft, that there is adequate protection to prevent a shaft fire from breaking out and burning down a building. Obviously, there is more inspection activity for a Type 1 hood as opposed to a Type 2 hood, and while $25 is appropriate for a Type 2 hood, to tell you the truth, I'm kind of surprised that one of my inspectors can perform full inspection for $25, but it seems to work, so we haven't adjusted that other than the 3%. We have decided that for commercial kitchen exhaust hood systems, which would have to be Type 1, to increase that to an appropriate amount of $120. And that fee was not pulled out of the air. That fee was based on a determination by our heating and ventilation inspector that in general it takes a minimum of 3 inspection stops from start to finish to inspect all the stages of a Type 1 commercial kitchen exhaust hood, and therefore the appropriate fee for that to cover the city's time would be $120. That being said, those are the only changes to the permit services fees that are assessed by Building and Safety, and what I would actually ask that you do at this point is reserve any questions that you might have. Although our adjustments seem to be pretty simple, you might have some questions, and I'd like to turn it over to the second half of this report, which will be given by Vaskin Demergian, to let you know what the fire department has done for their fees.
Good afternoon, Chairman Bohosian, members of the board. My name is Vaskin Demirjan. I'm the Environmental Management Coordinator. I'm filling in for Fire Marshal Dave Woods. Basically, the packet that you have, which is a loose packet given to you just recently, contains our hazmat, fire permit, and inspection fees. Basically, the fees were not changed since 2006. We are proposing a 4.3% increase since we missed last year's update. And the fees, basically, as I said, they're either inspection fees, where our inspectors, they go and verify certain facilities like assemblies, institutions, facilities that they have hazardous materials, that they have gas stations, for example, containing underground storage tanks, and we charge them based on the hazardous materials quantity or certain activity that they are conducting. The other fees are basically permit fees, basically that relates to activity they're doing. Like, for example, on the first page you see asbestos removal. It's an activity that we are permitting, or having candles, open flame. Certain activities that relate to fire prevention, they are permitted by our section also. We added one fee, which is on page 3, item number 15. We are capturing buildings, low-rise and mid-rise. We always permitted the high-rises, but we never permitted the low-rise and mid-rise. These are buildings, basically 4, 5, 6-story buildings. We always inspected them, but never permit them or charge them a fee. So Fire Marshal is proposing that we will issue a permit to operate low-rise and mid-rise buildings with this proposal. The other increase will be, like Stuart Tom mentioned, about connecting our fees to CPI. And I think that's a very smart idea because it saves us a lot of time. It simplifies the process every year. It also reduces the staff time to update our permit fees every year. So we will be requesting the City Council to authorize us to connect our fees to annual CPI. And this process, the CPI process, has been approved by other cities also. Right now, LA City uses the same process. Santa Monica uses the same process, and it's working perfectly. So we hope we have your support. If you have any questions, we can entertain your questions right now.
Chairman Bogosian, members of the board, I would like to point out that in addition to the immediate change of 3% to adjust what will become our new baseline fee figures, as Baskin pointed out, is being done for the fire-related fees, all of these fees for the Permit Services Center will also have a provision integrated into the fee resolution which will indicate that they will automatically adjust to match the changes in CPI from year to year with a cap of no more than, help me out, 5%. Thereby obviating the need to come back and present to this board or to the council a request to change just to keep up with inflation. And so that will just, once we establish these rates, once we have the CPI adjustment provision in the fee resolution, we'll be able to go ahead and make changes that match the actual index. And with that, if there are any questions for either building or fire, both Baskin and I would be happy to address them.
Are there any
Yeah,
questions?
I have a question. I noticed you mentioned 3% increase in period of 6 years because your last increase was in 2002. But the fire department increase is 4.3% since 2006 within a period of 2 years. Is there any reason was such a big difference between the two agencies of a
I can answer. Member Board Hassan, basically the fire department's program, the environmental management program, runs as an enterprise account. So we run as a business. We have revenue versus expenditure, and we have to balance our revenues and expenditures basically. Versus health, building and safety, they're more general fund, I think. So that could be one reason that we have to upgrade our fees constantly to remain as a enterprise account.
I can also, Chairman Bogosian, members of the board, I can also address from the permit services side that what was done was we actually took 3 example projects, fairly typical. One was construction of an addition to a residential building, another was an actual residential building, and then another was a commercial project. And what we did was we estimated on average staff time that was necessary in order to complete those projects, everything from plan check, inspection, and so forth. And we assigned individuals at the appropriate level that would typically, over the course of a year for all such projects, be involved in those projects, and we assigned their costs. We also attributed other costs because we have overhead. We have to pay for electricity just for this activity as well. In addition to that, there are certain things that might not be considered as an actual operating cost for building and safety, but they are. A portion of our finance department's expenses are need to be borne by us because we rely upon them. A small portion of our city attorney's office and so forth. My director's in the audience here. He directs myself. But in any event, what we did is we took those projects and attributed all of the costs that we were aware of, and we determined what the actual cost was, and we found that 3% was the adjustment that we wanted to make at this time. I see that Mr. Wiedeker, who actually took a look at our 2002 study and made the adjustments this year, has stepped up to the mic, so perhaps he has a little bit more information or detailed information that he can share with the board.
If I may ask the second question before Mr. Whitaker, I noticed, for example, in a building and safety, for review of geological report, you charge like something like $200, and compared to LA City, we charge over $400. Where do you get these numbers? I mean, is it the time that they spend more time on a report, or you feel that they're charging too much? Is something that is not clear to me as why would there be such a big difference?
I actually can address why some cities, such as City of LA, charge more, such as a $400 fee. They have licensed geotechnical engineers on staff, which are very, very expensive. I don't have licensed geotechnical engineers, and when we review those reports, they're reviewed by our staff, which tend to be paid at a lesser level than a specialized engineer, licensed individual. And as we take a look at those reports to determine what type of material, friction angles, soil cohesion, and so forth, we do it with the available staff. When we take a look at those reports and we find what an equivalent design static pressure is, we will go ahead and we will apply that in the design, but we're doing that with staff at our level. I can't tell you exactly how much it costs cities such as LA to have staff at that level review a report, but I can tell you that if it takes us on average 2 hours or so to review a report, then a $200 fee should be sufficient for us. And with that,
Chairman and Commissioners, first, thank you for your service to the community. I have sat where Mr. Tom has and worked with Stewart and for Stewart, and so let me at least express my appreciation to you. And although I'm not a fire department employee, I do know that if you look at building and safety, approximately a third of the employees are inspectors working out in the field. And if you filled your gas tank up in the last 6 months, then you would say, okay, so a third of our operation are driving vehicles, whereas Vaskin, out of your staff, how many are working in the field in vehicles?
More than third, obviously 70%.
Yeah, and so I think that we're going to be looking at this trend where operations that are field and inspection intensive are going to have far more demands placed upon their fees. In 1997, building and safety fees were increased by 16%. They were not increased again until 2002, where they went up by approximately 30%. They weren't all across the board. I think one of the advantages of the current strategy is, rather than periodic large increases, having a small increase annually based on the consumer price index is going to be much more palatable to customers and make much more sense from a budgeting strategy. We're not going to surprise you if you called us for fee estimates today with one number and then have a 30% increase 2 months from now. That would be hard to plan for. The consumer price index is actually calculated by the Federal Department of Labor for the Southern California region, and they publish that on a monthly basis. And again, that number is the one that we would propose. So I think In the future, your question is very good. Fires and buildings increases would both be the same number, except if there's some kind of periodic fuel adjustments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind. With reference to the building permit fees, again, the issue of there was no increase in the permit fees since 2002. Well, is that also saying that since building permit fees are based on the actual construction cost, which is the valuations in this case, is that saying that the valuations were not also raised in the last several years, or the valuations of the building permits were raised except the permit fees were not compensated? Okay, in order to make myself clear, we know construction valuations are based on square footage of cost. Well, first, I'd like to know how those are established. Is there a standards, industry standard that city uses, or is it based on actual survey, or is it based on actually what the contractors, applicants, they provide us? And once that is established, of course, the building permits are associated with the valuations, if that is correct. And if that is the case, if the permit fees were not adjusted since 2002, does that mean the valuations were never increased since 2002?
Chairman Bogosian, members of the board, I think I understand the question, and I'm going to answer it in parts. The first part has to do with the nature of our valuation index.
Right.
We're in the process of adopting the most recent, which is what we try to do, valuation index as published by ICC on their website. For the benefit of those perhaps in our viewing audience that don't understand what a valuation index is, it may not accurately reflect how much it costs an individual to build his or her project, because an individual might have a cousin or a friend or a relative that's in the construction business, and they might be able to build the exact same house as someone else for a fraction of the cost. But by using a standardized valuation index, it will establish a baseline figure for two identical houses, regardless of whether or not you have certain advantages available to you, that we can then base our fees on, because for two individuals building the exact same project, they should pay identical building permit and building plan check fees. And that's what a valuation index is. Okay. So the first part of the answer is, have the valuations gone up? The index that we use has been adjusted ever so slightly from year to year, and as new information is made available to us, of course, we go ahead and adopt and use that information. As far as what valuation we use on the project for the actual determination of the fees, if the applicant provides for us a valuation that seems reasonable and meets or exceeds that valuation index, we will accept that valuation. To that end, the latter part of the answer, which is have the valuations adjusted, thereby increasing the fees during those past 6 years, I would have to say that in general the fees probably, or the valuations probably have gone up. If you were to take a look at a typical valuation submitted by a builder or based on a valuation index chart for, say, a 2,000 square foot home back in 2002, and compare that to the same 2,000 square foot home in 2007 or 2008, I would imagine that the valuation that would be submitted on that application or derived from a valuation index chart would be higher in 2007 or 2008 than it was in 2002. What does that mean in terms of the fees that we collected? It means that the fees have been higher during the latter years, which is what you would expect. So in a roundabout fashion, some, not all, but some of the CPI has been addressed by the adjustments to construction valuation. However, remember that that is just a valuation index, and in fact, there have been periods of several years in a row historically where the valuation indices have not changed. They've remained static because it was recognized that that just establishes a baseline which may not be representative of the true construction cost. And every municipality can set or adjust the appropriate fees based on those indices.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, with that said, then to continue on that, and when we say that we are going to increase the fees, building permit fees, and it hasn't been increased since 2002. So I guess, Mr. Tom, you're referring to this factor that you are not actually building permit fee that's collected for a similar example, for a similar structure that you just had an example. It's really the factor that's being used to calculate the permit fee based on the valuation that has increased.
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. Let me clarify that so that all the board understands, viewing audience understands. What Board Member Kashishian just stated is correct. What we are doing is, through our fee resolution, is we have done some analysis and calculations to figure out what factor do we need to apply to the valuation of a project to determine that end fee, so that we can then properly recover our costs, so that the general fund does not have to subsidize the services that we provide to a builder. And to that end, we took a look at sample projects, figure out our costs, and we determined what that factor needs to be. That's what this fee resolution does. It establishes for building permits those factors. For all of our trade permits, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, those are not valuation driven. Those are driven by the number of fixture units that are installed and inspected. So this discussion really does not apply to the trade permits. But with respect to building permits, it is that factor that has been adjusted, and to some extent, that is probably why one might think, but wait a minute, CPI for 6 years, since 2002 through 2008, must have gone up more than 3%. Why is it that if fire needs to increase theirs by 4.2%, why is it that building is able to do so with a 3% adjustment and feel that it covers the cost? That is the adjustment that we feel needs to be made to these factors, in recognition that there is another thing in the background that has also changed, and that is the valuation that industry uses and ICC uses. That has also been adjusted slightly. And when you put the two together, it makes us whole again.
Thank you very much. May I ask another question? Again, with reference to the fees, I guess this has to do with fire department fees. Since some of our projects, especially building permits, require fire department reviews, does that mean the building permit, is there a separate fee charged for fire department plan checking and permitting, or the building permit that you collect already includes the services provided by fire department for review of the plans?
There is no separate permit or fee. In fact, the fees that we collect, when we identified average staff that would be attributable to these types of sample projects, we included members from other departments and their actual fully loaded costs, including benefits and retirement and so forth.
So these fire department fees that we just talked about, are these like annual inspection type fees?
Annual inspections
I see.
and activity related services, basically, like I mentioned, asbestos removal,
Okay.
handling.
Nothing to do with building permit,
No,
is that
that's
Mr.
correct.
Tom clarified? Okay, thank you.
Anything else? No.
Mr.
I
Chairman,
just
I'm
have,
sorry.
Mr. Tom and Mr. Dorian.
Yes.
First of all, I feel it is justified, the raise in the cost, because it's obvious what we are going through. It's unbelievable. Everybody knows, especially on gasoline, and where fire department or any one of our staff using their vehicles, just the cost of movement alone, it's costly and also affects in all areas. But I had one clarification I wanted to know. Of course, we go evaluation every year changes. We have the index of evaluation. So generally, evaluation today, if the building cost, when I'm getting a permit, the building cost is so much I'm showing, and in fact, there has been cases where it has been changed by the department by, of course, raising higher than what I had shown. And Therefore, the cost of the permit was based on the evaluation itself, and that evaluation already every year changes. It's not the same. So the permit was related to that, the cost of permit or plan checking, everything was related to that every year annually changed figure. Now this 3%, in a way, it's additional on top of that, which is what I want you, if you could clarify that for me.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, you are correct. The valuation index annually, I shouldn't say annually because the published valuation indices are not changed every year. They tend to be changed, I'm going to guess, every other, maybe every 3 years, ICC will come up with a revised valuation. And to tell you the truth, while some engineers or developers may be responsible and report a correctly adjusted valuation for their project each year, they don't always do that, which is why you alluded to the fact that from time to time we will take a look at the valuation, construction valuation that's entered on a permit application, and we will indicate that for our purposes that is not high enough, and we will make an adjustment to that. The best thing that I can indicate is that based on our actual costs to provide service, and that has to include the added costs of planners doing work, fire prevention people doing work, public works engineering staff doing work, and on, everybody who has their hands on the permit. Even when you consider the adjustments to the valuation reported on a permit application, or if you use our valuation index, the adjustment to the factors, as Board Member Kashishian pointed out, needed to be adjusted slightly in order to more accurately...
So in a way, this is a surcharge.
No, it's not really a surcharge. It's a correction or an adjustment. If we were to leave the fee resolution unchanged, absolutely unchanged, then the fee that we would end up collecting as a result of applying the previous factors to the valuation that we would be using would not come quite close enough to cover our costs. It would come close, but it simply would not come all the way, whether that's because we never have collected fully all of our fees or our costs, I should say, or if it's because we have been asked, or not asked, but we have more appropriately looked at all of the different staff that have their hands in the process of reviewing and inspecting a project. It's not just building and safety and my staff in the Permit Services Center. There are planners. We call down people from engineering and traffic and transportation to take a look at projects. As was asked earlier by Board Member Kashishian, the fire department fees are only their trip charges and things of that nature. Nowhere in fire's ordinance are there charges for their fire plan check activities. And as you know, pursuant to Health and Safety Code, state fire marshal, and by extension the local fire marshal, is legally mandated to check certain types of projects. We have to cover those costs. And so I don't think that the correct way to describe it would be a surcharge. I think what it is after a more careful look at what the city's actual costs are, using actual sample projects and attributing staff to it, we determined that a 3% adjustment would be necessary, except for those larger projects, because the fees are so large that to assess 3% extra on that would be exorbitant, and we don't think that we could justify that. So I would say that a surcharge is probably not the correct term. It's really a correction or an adjustment to the so-called factors that we were previously using in the original fee resolution.
Anyhow, as I stated before, I feel it's justified. The cost, definitely, especially 3% in so many years, definitely. I personally approve of that, and the board, I feel like the same way.
I have one more question. It may be a sort of a general question. Let's take an example of a residential project, for example. They give you the developer give you certain evaluation, which is, again, based on, you evaluate based on ICC reports and your expenses. But this same developer in a very expensive area may spend 3 times as much as what this evaluation is given at the time of permit. Is there any system to go back to see really what the actual cost of this project was, so you can recover some of your money if you go based on evaluation?
Board Member Esson, I'm not sure if I understand the question. Are you asking, after a project is done, is it possible to go back and take a look at our involvement during the life of that project and figure out what our actual expenses were and refund the difference? Is that what you're asking?
No, not actual expenses. You said you have an index that ICC issues, right?
That's
this
correct.
Index, for example, gives you, let's say, $150 per square foot for a residential on a 2,000 square foot. That's $300,000. So you figure certain amount of fee for plan check based on that $300,000. That's one
correct.
of the factor. There are other factors. You said your expenses and other things. Now, this same developer spend maybe twice as much because he puts very fancy, whatever it is. It comes up to, instead of 300,000, it comes to 500,000. Is there any way for city to recover that difference?
Oh, Board Member Esson, I understand the question now. Unfortunately, there's not. If a developer does spend extra money on very high-end fixtures and equipment within the project, per description, under the code, they are supposed to include the cost of all fixed equipment in their valuation. It is very common practice for developers not to do that, and therefore we are forced to assess our fees based on a lower valuation, which is either the valuation that they provide to us as they submit the application, if such valuation meets or exceeds our valuation index, or if their valuation is unreasonably low, we will apply the valuation index so it never drops below a reasonable baseline. But if later on we find, wow, there's a lot of special stuff that was in this project which really jacked up the valuation, is there a way for us to go back and collect that? Presently, there is not.
Okay.
I would like to add a comment to that also for Mr. Esson. Again, my understanding is that building permit fees, as Mr. Tom stated earlier, they're intended to recover the cost of the services that city provides. For a developer who spends thousands of dollars on extra fixtures, doesn't necessarily cost an additional work for the city inspector to inspect those issues, or maybe plan checking. So perhaps that's why the city does not go after those people and try to escalate their valuations and collect additional fee. I don't think the city is in that business.
That is a good point, and while we are proposing collectively with Building and Fire to have a very, very modest increase of either 3% or 4.2%, while it is our intent to correctly and justifiably secure fees that will cover our costs, we are in no way trying to secure extra funds that we're not entitled to. We really are just trying to cover our costs at this point.
Mr. Tom, one last question. So these fee adjustments, if approved, which I believe it will be, we have no problem with that, as far as I don't have any problem. Does this take into account the vacancies that you pointed out earlier that currently are in the building department?
These fees actually do not consider staffing levels. What they did instead was they took a look at typical projects and the costs of appropriate level staff that would be assigned to those projects. If I'm unable, as you know, I've had trouble filling some vacancies. If I'm unable to fill vacancies, that's another issue that I, as the manager of the department, have to deal with. But that shouldn't, in one way or another, affect the fees that we collect. The fees are truly based on the level of service that we need to provide, and I'll deal with staffing levels on a separate matter.
Thank you.
So
That being said, it looks like discussion on this issue has pretty much covered everything that we had hoped. What I'm hoping is, despite the fact that this is in the reports for information only section at 7B on the agenda, if it is indeed this board's desire to submit a recommendation that the City Council adopt these fees as presented, I would respectfully request that the board make a motion to that effect, making such a recommendation, so that we then will be able to move forward with the recommendation from this board.
is there any motion on the floor?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to commissioners basically to draft a recommendation
this.
to adopt the fees as stated here.
Second?
I second the motion.
Roll call, please.
Board Member Eric Keshishian,
Yes.
Board Member Harmig Abkarian.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Bachman Esan,
Yes.
Chairman George Bogosian.
Yes.
Board members, I just want to thank you for that. It doesn't get much better than unanimous support, and I appreciate that. Finally, moving on at item 7C, we have a report from the Fire Marshal regarding Fire Prevention Week. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Vaskin Demirjian, and Vaskin has a guest in the audience.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, like every year, the Glendale Fire Department is looking forward to celebrate Fire Prevention Week this year, also 2008. It will be in October, second week, and I have Tanya Gregorian. She is our public education coordinator. She will give us an update on our projected activities that will be coming in October.
Good afternoon, Chairman Bogosian, members of the board and staff. I'm here today to talk to you briefly about what we're expecting in October, which is Fire Prevention Week. It's an annual commemorative event, and if you allow me to, I'll give you a little bit of information about it historically and some current stats about why we do this. Fire Prevention Week was established to commemorate the Great Chicago Fire of 1871 that killed more than 250 people and left 100,000 people homeless, destroyed more than 17,400 structures, and burned more than 2,000 acres. This year, from October 5th to the 11th of 2008, we're going to be celebrating and commemorating this event. Fire safety advocates and fire departments all over the United States, including our own, is teaming up with the National Fire Protection Association, the NFPA, to urge residents to prevent home fires. And this is the year for this is the theme for this year, preventing home fires. During Fire Prevention Week, this year's campaign focuses on preventing all the leading causes of home fires: cooking, heating, electrical equipment, and smoking materials. According to the latest NFPA research, more than 2,500 people died in home fires in the U.S. in 2006. This is a very significant number. This is a problem. 12,500 people were injured, and fire departments responded to 396,000 home fires total, which accounted for 80% of the civilian deaths and 76% of the injuries for that year. So again, let me mention it's going to be from October 5th to the 11th, and we have some programs in place from the fire department that we're going to initiate again this year. One of those things is, of course, the annual fire school drills that we do. During the month of October, we go out and we inspect, and we do all of these annual fire school drills where the students do participate and the staff in practicing safe evacuation and timing them to make sure that they're meeting the guidelines that they need to. We also have a program in place for the elementary schools, which is called 5 Fire Safety Facts During Fire Prevention Week, and this goes out to the 4th grade students in the elementary schools, and the teachers during Fire Prevention Week talk about a fire safety fact on each of those days throughout the week and design their curriculum around that. As well as having local fire awareness presentations all over the city. We're going to be having fire extinguisher demonstrations on how to use a fire extinguisher properly, how to put out a fire if you need to, if it is a small fire in your own home, and talking about basic fire safety and emergency safety information. So we're encouraging local businesses, schools, if anybody wants information, please utilize us as a resource. We are able to come to your facilities and help you out and give you any information that you may need. Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions?
Well, what I can say, we are very proud, as representing this board, we are very appreciative and pleased to have a very good department like yours. Fire Department of Glendale is unique, and we are proud of you and proud of our management in all areas, what Glendale is doing. If there is anything more we can do, we would be very glad to make any more, presenting this. So on October 5th through 11, anything we can do to encourage people to, facilitate what your department is doing, we will be very glad. And thank you very much for the good work you guys are doing.
Chairman Bogosian, thank you so much for the nice words about our fire department here in Glendale. Again, as I mentioned, I mean, it would be fantastic if we could have the local businesses participate in this. I mean, we're offering the service to train their staff on how to use fire extinguishers properly and how to evacuate properly. And we even teach a program called the CERT program through the fire department, which is 20 hours of free training that we offer that will teach people how to properly be prepared for disasters, light search and rescue techniques, fire suppression techniques, first aid techniques. All of this is a service that we have for the community, and we really, really want our community of Glendale to utilize these resources. So thank you for your support.
Thank you very much.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Could this be also on television, brought up so people would be more, informed of what is happening, what the fire department is doing? Is there anywhere to get more to the people
Yes.
to inform them?
Thank you, Chairman Bogosian. There certainly is. All residents can access the Glendale Fire Department website at glendalefire.org. We take any opportunity to attend the city council meetings and talk about and present these different programs to let people know that it is a free resource for them and that they can use these resources. Again, the website is an excellent resource. All of the information about the CERT program is on the website. We've trained many businesses in Glendale, their staff, including businesses such as the Glendale Galleria and Kaiser and Nestle, and getting some of their staff trained in emergency response, disaster preparedness, fire suppression, first aid. So if anybody in our viewing audience may want to find out more about this program, they can certainly go onto our website at www.glendalefire.org and find out about it, or they can contact the fire department. And again, my name is Tanya Gregorian, and they can ask for me, and I can give them any information that they need. But thank you.
Thank you very much. That's great.
Ms. Gregorian, I have a question for you. You mentioned earlier that fire department does provide this kind of educational training in the schools and whatnot. I'd like to know, is it for the public schools only, or does it include private schools in Glendale area?
It includes all schools in Glendale, including private schools.
I see. Thank
Yes.
you.
Thanks, Tanya, and thank you, Chairman Bogosian, for your nice comments. I'll turn it over
Very
to...
much.
No?
Now, can we go to our...
At this point,
Tom, are we all done with item number 7?
we are done. This takes us to agenda item 8, in which you have the pleasure of
Adjournment.
adjourning.
And is there any motion to adjourn?
To adjourn?
Second.
We don't need second, but it's fine. The meeting is adjourned.